But we want to get started, and most folks that are here tonight have been with us since the Academy started. But I still want to say welcome. For those that are here for the first time, I think there's maybe three or four people here for the first time. I am Annie Kern with the Marion County Prosecutor's Office, and I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator with the office. And the Justice Academy, this is its fourth year. How many of you have been with us? This is your fourth year with the Academy. Raise your hand. Michelle Waymeyer from our office. Yeah. Well, this is good, and we appreciate you coming, giving our office an opportunity to teach on relevant subjects, things that are going on in our county as far as the justice system is concerned or public safety. We want to make sure that we are providing information that you can take back to your communities and share it, or take to your families or your neighbors and share that information. But tonight's subject, overcoming the barriers of reentry. We have two, maybe three speakers with us tonight. And I'm going to turn it over now to introduce those speakers. I'm going to turn it over to Jim Coffey. Jim works in our Community Prosecution Division, and he is one of the coordinators. He works specifically on North District, which is located inside Washington Park. So Jim, you want to go ahead and introduce our speakers?
Tonight standing right here is Andrew Fogel. Andy is the deputy prosecutor and is the supervisor of the corrections division in our office. He works closely with other government agencies and service providers in the areas of reentry and alternative sentencing, as well as assuming many other duties and responsibilities at the office, including the coordination of the new expungement law that passed in our office. And Andy currently represents the prosecutor's office on the Marion County Community Corrections Board and the Marion County Reentry Coalition. Additionally, Vop Osley is here, a city councilor. He's a member of the Indianapolis City Council. He represents District 15, which covers much of the downtown area and parts of the near west side of Indianapolis. Councilor Osley serves on the Rules, Public Works, and Metropolitan Economic Development Committees of the Council. In 2010, he was the Democratic nominee for Secretary of State of Indiana. Councilor Osley is an architect who has led urban design and architecture projects in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. He's a founding partner and principal of the new development and architecture practice A+X. So everybody please welcome Vop Osley and Andy Fogel.
I'm Andy Fogel. One thing that Jim neglected to tell you was I was his boss until he left us as my paralegal in expungement to do an incredible job that he's doing now. I think before Vop and I get started, a couple of people I want to make sure that you get to meet. The mayor has just appointed a new director of reentry, Chris Reeder. Chris has had a long career in public service, most recently with the Citizens Complaint Board, and he has really hit the ground running. I've asked him, and totally unexpected to him until he walked in here, just to say a few words about the commitment that the mayor's office also has to reentry and to helping make our neighborhoods safer by making the people that come into the neighborhoods more productive and more law-abiding. So Chris, if you would just take a moment, please.
Well, I am the last-minute entry into this. I will say this: upon my appointment, there were a couple of people that I was told that I needed to get in contact with, and one of them was Councilor Osley, and the other one was Andy Fogel. So you have two people who, number one, even spending some time with Councilor Osley, he has a passion for reentry. Not only does he have a passion for it, he is willing to put a lot of energy into making sure that individuals who come out of incarceration have a very, accessible time back into the community. And he's willing not only to just present that, but also to make sure that things happen in the council, because that's where it's going to happen. It's going to happen with legislative change. It's going to happen with Andy Fogel talking to individuals on the state level and making sure that they understand the barriers that exist for reentrance back into our communities. The mayor has a very high priority on making sure that we have a network of service providers who bring wraparound services to individuals who are coming back into the community. He has given me the charge to do that. I'm working with conjunction with the Department of Public Safety. One of the things that we found out in getting the data necessary to start using the mayor's approach for crime prevention and that kind of thing is that there are several areas in the city which represent what we would consider to be high crime areas. They have been designated due to the data and not due to the population. So this is not redlining in any way, shape, or form, but it is targeting areas that need help in making sure that the quality of life for the citizens that live within those districts receive the kind of services necessary to make sure that it's safe. One of the things that we found out was over 90% of suspects who are involved in crime in Indianapolis, over 90% are ex-felons. And 75% of the individuals that have been victims of crimes are ex-felons. We've also found out that if we can keep at least 50 felons from reoffending and going back into the system over a 3-year period, we can save $1.5 million in the cost of having those individuals go back into prison. So there's a lot of, I guess you could say, common sense reality to the fact that we need to make sure, to make our city safe, that we have a reentry program and reentry service providers that are going to lower the barriers. Ban the Box is something that Councilor Osley did that is remarkable in that it helps to eliminate the stigma of an individual trying to get a job. At least they will get an opportunity to have an interview if, in fact, their skills match the requirements of the individuals that are trying to hire them. So that gives them a leg up, so to speak. There are other things that we're going to try to do within the next few months that I'm going to be in charge of this endeavor. Hopefully, we'll continue on even past myself and Councilor Osley being here because this is an important thing. We can't throw people away. We can't think that no one has an opportunity because they've made a mistake. I always tell people, I'm an offender. And when I say that, people say, so what did you do? But when I say that, I'm saying that no one is perfect. Everyone makes mistakes. One gentleman told me once, he said, there are criminals and then there are people who commit criminal acts. And so for those individuals who make a mistake and perpetrate a criminal act, we want to make sure that they don't have to pay for that for the rest of their lives. That when they serve their time, they come back into the community and they're accepted and they're helped and they're hopefully restored in a place of dignity because they are citizens of this city. One thing I'll share with you and then I'll sit down is this weekend we had a community cleanup. This was an individual who had spent an extended amount of time in prison. And after he was released from prison, he came back to his community. And he said to some of the people that work with him in the project called Impact, that's a IMPD initiated program that helps reentrants back into society as well. But one of the things he said to them was, my community has gone to pot. And he didn't really use those words, but in other words, this was not even a satisfying situation for someone who had left the community in one way and come back after an extended period of time to look at their community and say, I want to do something. He didn't have the resources to do that. But on Saturday, we had individuals from DMD, Department of Metropolitan Development. We had individuals from Department of Public Safety. We had police officers. We had parole officers. We had private individuals. We had social service agencies. We had ex-felons. We had community people all working together to clean up an area from LaSalle to Station and from 30th Street to 32nd Street. And we literally cleaned up and amassed tons of trash and leaves and cut yards, did things that some of the people that lived in that area were unable to do because they were either sat up with a lot of kids or there wasn't a man in the house or they were just elderly. And so we were able to do that. And out of that, this young man, all of everything that was there was volunteer. There was no city dollars involved. And that's one of the things that the Director of Public Safety wants to do. He wants to empower the communities to take charge over changing what's going on in your communities, making sure that when government doesn't have the resources and government doesn't have the wherewithal because of budget constraints or whatever that might be, that the community is empowered, that the community has the ability to make these positive changes, and therefore they can sustain those changes after or when we have other deficits in terms of funding. So I'm encouraged about what we had planned. Talking with Andy and working with Councilor Osley, I think we're going to have a tremendous impact on the city. And like I said, over that weekend, just that weekend, and I've only been in this job about a month, but I've seen great movement, I've seen commitment, and I've seen a desire to make a difference in the lives of people that we walk next to every day. And so I thank you for this time. I thank you for the opportunity. You're going to learn a lot from these two gentlemen, as well as the czar of reentry who sits right here in the front row here, Don Hawkins. So I think you can just take this opportunity really to see the effects that we're having in the city. Thank you very much.
And speaking of that, in order for us to get things done, you need somebody to use a lot of cliches: boots on the ground, roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty, know the people. You have had in your class probably one of the best examples of someone who's dedicated his life to help these folks. That's Don Hawkins. And I'd ask Don just to say a few words so that Bob and I have the opportunity to finish our report. Just a few. But we have an event coming up through his organization and the Marion County Reentry Coalition this Thursday on reentry. And I just wanted Don just to say a couple of words. You can, if you yell and say it loud enough, you can do it there, or you're more than welcome to come up here. But I think everybody should give Don a big hand for everything he's done for this community.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure to be with you guys the last 4 weeks. I've really been impressed with the curriculum that prosecutors put together for everybody. And I was glad to see they ended up with a program on reentry. Indianapolis is very fortunate to have the mayor that we've got that is really big on reentry. He has pretty much given us everything we've asked for pertaining to reentry. The mayor and the public safety director have done a fantastic job of giving us free rein on putting together a lot of programs that we want to put together. The good news about Indianapolis is there is a lot of good service providers in Indianapolis. There's a lot of very good people ready, willing, and able to help people when they get out of prison. The only problem is putting the two together. We go to the prisons and tell people when they get out places they can go, the different service providers and PACE, the Goodwill, Salvation Army, HRH, Bonner Center, etc. But a lot of people don't get to that. I brought 25 of these with me tonight. In fact, I redone it after the first couple meetings because the ladies that was here earlier talked about adult protective services, domestic services. This is a flyer that I put together a few years ago that lists any organization that offers help is on here for emergency. Everything from emergency shelters, from Wheeler, Good News Mission, Horizon House, HIP, etc. It's all on here. The main sources, I can't stress enough, and I think people have done that before. If anybody that knows anybody needs help, please get on the phone and call 211. 211 is an information service that's available 24 hours a day to anybody. They've got everything. If what they don't have, they can find for you. I've got a website, indyhelpers.com, that lists organizations that is more detailed to the homeless and reentry industry. But CHIP has got a pretty good handbook. COCOA's got a handbook. The mayor's office has got a real nice handbook that's got 78 organizations in it that offer services to ex-offenders. But I'll put these back there. You can get it.
Great, thank you. Okay, what we've been asked to do is kind of talk to you about barriers to overcoming reentry. First question's always asked, well, what is reentry? How many people are coming out of prison? It's not just prison. We get about 5,000 people a year that come out of prison. We send about 5,000 there. We probably have between 54 to 58,000 arrests every year. And if you kind of take that out, there are more people that end up with convictions and criminal records than go to prison. So reentry is anybody that's had a criminal conviction. They could go to prison. They could be sentenced just to jail term. They could go on to community corrections. They could be placed onto probation without even having been incarcerated. What happens in situations like that? They have a conviction. With that conviction, it's sort of like the Scarlet Letter, which my high school junior is now reading. You know, it is a sign of shame, and it hurts them trying to do things in the community. Now, when you get a conviction, you may come out on community correction, probation, parole, or even into the reentry courts. And you got court hearings you have to go to. Drug testing, program fees. You could be restricted in your movement. You might have house arrest. You might have electronic monitoring. Those are requirements. That's what you pay the piper. That's the cost of what happened because you broke the law. And the courts and the system want to make sure that you obey what those rules are. But, and I'm going to turn it over to the counselor, we start talking about certain community barriers that you also have, and you've seen them in your community. Besides them having to go to court, them having to be electronically monitored, we have all kinds of other areas. Bob, did you want to kind of pick it up through?
Sure. In the United States, about 70% of the companies have some blanket ban on the hiring of ex-offenders, which means then that the job pool is far tighter than just for someone who is unemployed. In addition to that component, that a segment of the population is reduced to an availability of 30% of the jobs, individuals who come out have lost time, have lost competitiveness with the peers that they had when they went in. And so often then when it comes to employment, individuals who are coming out of prison or jail are behind and have lost progress relative to their peers. So it makes it harder for them to be competitive with other individuals within their sector. That's one. Two, when it comes to housing, there are certain offenses, certain drug and violent offenses that make it impossible, based on U.S. law, to get public housing. So if I have committed a certain type of crime, I should not even think about applying for public housing. Now, let's think about this. I come out, and as Deputy Prosecutor Fogel just mentioned, I come out and I've got fees and fines and so on that I am obligated to pay. I am challenged in finding work. I am challenged because now my work pool is drastically reduced. I'm trying to find housing, and depending on my crime, I'm unable to find that. My life choices are drastically reduced, but yet I am still obligated to pay my fees, my fines. I'm obligated to my family. I'm obligated to my children. If I have children, I likely have child support that I have to take up. So these challenges are real, and they're real every day. These are the things that myself and Deputy Prosecutor and the Director of Reentry, that we have to deal with when it comes to looking at how do we make it easier and more straightforward for individuals coming out of incarceration. Did you want to talk about education?
Yeah, and the other thing too is when you have education, okay, you have somebody that's behind in learning experience. If they've gone to jail, if they have spent time defending themselves, they may have had to quit their educational situation. If they have gone to prison, they no longer have the educational opportunities they used to have. You used to be able to go and you could be taught at the prison, you could get grants, you could get a college education. That really, for the most part, doesn't exist unless you can pay for it. So you fall behind there. And then the other is community acceptance. When they come back into your community and you know that they're an ex-con, how do you all feel about it? How welcoming are you to them simply because of how they're now defined? Not because of who they are, but how they're defined.
Let me say something with that.
Sure.
I often ask folks in smaller groups, how many of them have ever broken the law? who've ever gone above the speed limit in a school zone more than once.
Or run by a school bus and not stopped.
It wasn't until I got into council and became very committed to issues related to reentry that I understood that it was actually a crime to be a bad driver, that there's something called habitual traffic offense. I was shocked because I thought, my God, that's me. So here's the deal. So often we look at people as us versus them. But the real difference is the us versus them is, the us is, I got away with it, and the them is, you got caught. But it changes the way that we look. It changes the way that society looks, that employers look at those individuals simply because they spent time. They got accused, convicted, and now have an offense around their necks, as the deputy prosecutor says, that's Scarlet A.
Now, the idea of when you're addressing these barriers, and this applies to all of you in the communities, in order for these people to become productive, and again, understand, there are some people, and I think we all have run into these people, who are much better off spending the rest of their life being watched by the state of Indiana in the Department of Correction. But that's not the majority. I don't even want to give it a percentage, but 20%, 15%. Most people come back into the communities. One of my prior jobs was to be the director of the Arrestee Processing Center, where everybody who got arrested, or almost everybody, came in. And when I would work in the secure side and help check people in, first thing they do is they put your thumbprint down, a PID, and they see if you've got a criminal history based on that thumbprint. Almost everybody who came in had a gallery number, had been there before. You get a few people that hadn't, which means we continue to have a revolving door of people continue to come in. So what we end up doing, whether what Don's doing, or Chris, or Vop, or myself, what we tend to want to do, or my friend Al Poland who just walked in, welcome Al, you got to raise their level of employability. If they're working, they pay taxes, and if they're working and make a good living, they're not going to be breaking into your house or stealing stuff out of your garage. You got to raise their educational attainment, what they can do, because you all know it's one thing to have a job, it's something else just to work and to have a career, something you can grow in, something you want to go to. Build social skills. There's a lot of people, and especially amongst the younger people that you've all seen. I'm the prosecutor in what's called reentry court. These are people that have been in prison. The average age is about 23, 24. That means they've been to prison already. They've served hard time. They don't have any social skills. They don't know how to keep an appointment. They don't know how to get up. They don't know how to look presentable if they're going to go out in a job interview. They have antisocial attitudes and feelings. You've got to tell them the people they're messing with aren't the good people. They've got to have better role models. But that's us in the community. We had to provide that. If we reject them, if we tell them, you're not acceptable, we don't want anything to do with you, you ex-con, then what are they going to do? They're going to go to their peers where they can feel accepted. They're going to be in a place that they feel comfortable. Families. One of the things you hear is about how tough it is for a mom, usually a mom, who's been in prison to come back to their kids, or a dad who's been in prison to come back to the kids. You know how hard it is for these kids? A lot of them feel mom and dad rejected them. Not that they were rejected, or they rejected their folks. They don't know why their folks went away, and they have trouble readjusting. Be able to help them work on the basic social skills that you all have. To say please, thank you, excuse me, be there on time. And a lot of this, and I will tell you that the council and I both worked on the Indianapolis-Marion County Council on Reentry Policy Study Commission, and these are things that we're trying to implement in a group that's called the Marion County Reentry Coalition, of which Chris is also a part of and Don is a part of. Employment and housing barriers. This kind of gets started with that. You want to kind of give us an idea of what you're going to find. Again, Bob kind of touched on this, but when an employer looks at somebody, they may not even care how good they are, what they can do. All they know is they've got a criminal background. It could be a criminal theft 25 years ago. but they still have that.
Here's an example of something. Last year, when the expungement bill was being put before the State House, there was an individual who testified. This is an anecdotal story, but I think it gets the point across. This idea of having a criminal record. When does it end? Here's the story. This gentleman went to testify on behalf of or in support of this idea of creating this expungement bill. And he's a 66-year-old fellow. He committed a crime when he was 19. I think he robbed a convenience store. And he served 7 years. And he got out when he was 26. So now, he's 66 now. He got out when he was 26. He has since gotten married, raised a family, has sent 2 daughters to college, he's served in a number of committees. He belongs to a political party, which is not my political party, but nonetheless he belongs to, and he's well respected in that political party, and has done amazing things going forward. Now, 2 things happened when he gave his testimony that day. This was back in March, I believe, of last year. The first was after he gave his history, and he talked about what he had done. And by the way, he was a rep for a corporation, a Fortune 500 corporation, which is based here, and headquartered here. And he has sold his product, or he reps this particular product, to folks that I know. So that's how I got to know this fellow. And he's been repping for about 12 years for this company. So the first thing, after he gave his story, he asked a question, and the question was this, of the members of the committee in the State House. How long will I be considered an ex-offender? It's 40 years. Now, the second thing that happened, this is on a Wednesday. Thursday, I see it online, the stories that go on in the State House, and you read about them. Good story. I saw his story. Well, other people saw his story too. Because on Friday, he was given notice by the company he'd been repping for the last 12 years that it had come to their attention that he had a criminal record. And they did not permit individuals who rep their product to have criminal records. So therefore, they were terminating his contract. 40 years.
Let me ask all of you this. How many of you know somebody in your neighborhood that got a conviction, came back from prison, or maybe spent some time in jail or not, and just couldn't make it and ended up going back into the joint? More hands going up than not. That's what will happen with these folks. They want to try to do it. They want to try to make good. But with a criminal record, you take a job that you can barely make a living off of, something that you feel is a burden, and you're underemployed. You can't make enough money. There's a strong temptation then, where do you get your money? Well, you go back to the way that you knew that you could make some money, even if you got caught. Housing, places you can't live simply because you got that criminal background. Now, some of the ideas of housing, we'll go with this real quickly. There are different areas and agencies in Indianapolis. The Indianapolis Housing Authority. That's a very powerful authority, and I'm sure the council can give you some stories with that, but you can be evicted from federal housing for drug-related activities, determined you're actively using drugs, convicted of methamphetamines on the property, required if you're a lifetime sex offenders. The Section 8 HUD housing isn't going to let you live there. Now, we do have something on the other hand, the Department of Metropolitan Development. There are 3 HUD grants that you may not be aware of. They have opportunities for people that have AIDS, Emergency Solution Grant, the ESG, for those who are at risk of homelessness or in less than 30% of the median family income, and Continuum of Care Grant for those who are homeless or who have qualifying disabilities or serious mental illness. So the help is out there. I know that we have worked with the Housing Authority. They're trying to they can't break the rules, that's what the feds tell them, but they try to loosen it up. They try to help make it a little bit better. But you do have those resources. Is there anything you want to add to that? Okay. There are places out there that if you have somebody that's come into your community who needs help, one that I've worked with a lot, and I know several of us around who have worked with, is the Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic. Those folks, you can find them online. When I get into the expungement piece later, what you're going to find is they have a help desk in the basement City County building that will help people that can't afford an attorney to work on expungement matters. They take family and consumer law issues, lack of identification, reinstatement of licenses, options to clear your record, and they don't charge you anything. It's a legal clinic for the poor. They have Project Grace, which is a program that assists people with criminal histories, and they increase access to services after incarceration. CHIP, Coalition for Homeless Intervention and Prevention. They work a great deal with these populations. They don't provide housing, but they do act sort of as an umbrella organization for all those groups that try to help folks that need housing. We have, for employment, there's Recycle Force. Anybody here familiar with Recycle Force? Okay. They hire ex-offenders. That's what they're established to do. They help them make a living. The workforce development, they have reentry specialists, or hopefully will be able to work with this population. Goodwill Industries, both hard skill training and work experience, and soft skill education, referral to other services. Strive Indy, which is a federally funded program administered by the VOA, Volunteers of America. And the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce. We've begun those discussions to see if they can help us deal with these populations. All of this came from what the counselor, Don, several other people here have worked on with the Reentry Study Commission, which was headed up by the City County Council. One of the things that we'll find, which is a big burden to some of these people, is you can't get through the door. You ever been convicted of a felony? You ever been arrested? Yes. Okay, well, you go into this cylindrical file here on the ground, and I'm going to put the others into a tray. That's not really fair. If you can get through that first couple of steps and they don't know you're an offender, then they must have seen something about you. But I will tell you that the person who got this through for the city and county is our counselor. So, Bob, I'm going to let you explain how this works.
Okay, very good. Thanks. The EEOC has some guidelines, four basic guidelines that it strongly encourages companies to look at when looking at criminal backgrounds. The first is the age at which a crime was committed. The second was the length of time since the crime was committed. The third is the nature of the crime. And the fourth, which is probably the most important thing of all, the relationship of the particular crime to the job that's being sought. And that's probably the most important thing of all. Now, in many cases, it's been determined that when you have a blanket ban on the hiring of ex-offenders, you oftentimes are dealing in a form of bias, because certain populations have a higher representation in the criminal justice system than others, and therefore you have a disproportional or disparate impact on a particular group of individuals. So the EEOC came together to put together these sets of guidelines that they strongly encourage employers to look at. Well, we did the same thing on the council. Our determination was this: in order for you to be looked at fairly, you have to get in front of the person who is doing the hiring. You have it's a fraction under 6, you have almost 6 times more likelihood of either being hired or being called back for a second interview if you were in front of the person who is doing the hiring. Now, if you have, however, a screening process in front of you, and I did say now that approximately 70% of the companies in this country have a blanket ban on the hiring of ex-offenders. If you have this sort of screening process, that little box on an application form, anybody ever seen that little box that asks about your criminal history? You know what I'm talking about? Well, it acts as a screener because individuals in that box, basically, or in that pile with the check boxes, maybe don't get the same review as those who have the unchecked applications and are in the other file, in the other pile. So we wanted to eliminate that completely. Now, it's a difficult thing, and as the deputy prosecutor just mentioned, we've been working with other companies here in Marion County, working with the chamber, to help to bring this sort of blanket, we don't hire, bring it down to nothing. So what we started doing, and what we decided to do, was let's work with the city of Indianapolis, and its vendors. And I did not realize this, but the city of Indianapolis has over 20,000 vendors who do business with it. 20,000. Well, here's the way that it rolls out now. If you want to do business with the city of Indianapolis, you want to be considered a vendor of the city of Indianapolis, then you have to abide by the very same policies. And that is elimination of the box on the application form. That's one. And two, no questions whatsoever about criminal history on a first interview. No review whatsoever. And this is something that's very difficult to police, to use a term. But that is an arrest that does not lead to conviction cannot be considered as a reason for not hiring. Now, that one is a tough one, and we recognize that. But here's the deal. It is best when you are able to sell yourself, your talents, your goods to the people that you want to hire you. And that's what we want to make sure is possible through the Ban the Box. The Ban the Box is a national sort of movement that started about 10 years ago in real force. And a number of cities, almost 60 cities across the country have done it now. We're just one of them. Our big goal is to get the corporations behind this, the largest corporations behind this, to help push other corporations. And I want to give real big kudos to one in particular. And I know that they're always talking about the rates and how much money they're going to be charging us and all the rest of it, and that is Citizens Gas. But I'm going to tell you, I've got the highest respect for Citizens Gas, and I'm willing to pay that extra bit because they were one of the first companies that we went to talk to last year to ask them to remove the box from their application form, and they said yes. It's the right thing to do. We'll get rid of it. It's one. Two, they were one of those companies that said, we will make a special effort to reach out to those communities where we have ex-offenders and try and provide them jobs. Because they understand the cost to our community when individuals don't work. Now, this is the right thing to do. It's also a smart business thing to do. So anyone in here who's a business person or knows other business people, do understand that more people who are working, who own homes, are going to be turning on their gas. Follow what I'm saying? It is not only the right thing to do, it's a smart business thing to do because it puts more money in the economy. So this idea of ban the box, this is reason for implementing it. Drop the barriers, make it more possible for people to be more competitive, to get in front of an employer.
Now, our second section is going to be an expungement, but before we do that, we're going to take a break. But before we take the break, as to what we've gone over so far, do any of you have any questions or comments, anything we can answer on your behalf? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question.
You guys speak up. Bob can hear great, but I'm old and I can't hear real well.
I don't know if you're going to touch on this, but I have yet to hear anything about mental health assistance or even asking a judge to perform a mental health evaluation or assessment for people who just cannot make it out here for whatever reason.
I'd like to touch on that very, very quickly, and that's not an area we're really going to get into, but one of my jobs with the prosecutor is to work on what we call problem-solving court alternative options. For the longest time, we only really had one docket, which was called our PAIR docket for misdemeanors, people that had Axis 1 problems. Judge Barbara Crawford is creating, and in fact, actually our first session is tomorrow morning, a new mental health docket. It's not a full docket, but she's been able to put together, with the help of a lot of us that I've already mentioned here, resources to be able to bring people into that court so that we can get mental health evaluations. We as prosecutors can start putting together solutions that will help address that criminogenic need. The idea with problem-solving courts is to help them solve their problem, and mental health is a big one, as is addiction services is a big one. Not necessarily to get a conviction or an acquittal, sometimes that happens, but to get them on the right path. We had an interesting discussion today, we meaning Prosecutor Curry and myself and a few other people, with some people that dealt with folks that have brain damage, that have mental incapacity, mild mentally retarded. They don't qualify as mentally ill, but they still have problems, and we're still trying to address that. So yeah, as a community, we are working on it. That's all I can tell you. It's new. It's something, as a system, we really haven't done a lot on, but it's recognized. The Marion County Realtor Coalition understands that that's a very important thing, and I think our criminal justice system does. I wish I could say, hey, beginning tomorrow, we're going to have this and this and this. We're not. But beginning right now, we now recognize it's a problem, and we are working to address it. Okay, that's another question, ma'am.
I have a question for this gentleman over here, Mr. Reed. And that was, you were talking about, Director Riggs wants to ensure that neighborhoods are empowered to improve their own the area. And I was wondering if DPS is helping people to connect with INRC and other organizations like that that do teach neighborhoods how to empower themselves.
Part of part of what we are attempting to do is to make sure that we do create those networks, because from the standpoint of reentry, we don't do direct services. To have what you would call a one-stop shop where we would have mental health services, where we would have employment services, where we would have all of these things available for people to come in would cost us too much. So since we do have a large network of people that are able to do those things, what we want to do is to create a network where everyone is together, so that when we have an individual that needs those kinds of services, we can direct them to that particular service provider so that those needs can be met. So that's a part of what I'm going to be doing over the next few months, to make sure that we have that network and we have that communication link so that we can communicate those needs that the reentrants have to the service providers, and then link those two together. And then make sure that not only that we monitor those things to make sure that that person or persons, are indeed taking advantage of those services. And if not, why not? If it's the service provider, if there's some kind of barrier there, again, we want to lower that barrier so that we can make sure that those services are provided in a way that's going to be accepted by the community.
Okay. Well, specifically, I was referring to the thing about neighborhoods. I'm sorry, three of you are talking, so I'm not sure if you were the one, but we talked about what was, the neighborhood and all the volunteers and everybody that went together. But actually, I lived in Indianapolis for 12.5 years, and it wasn't until last year that I even heard of INRC. That's even though I have a send house that I got with help from INHP, not alphabet soup. But I finally learned about INRC, and we have some wonderful workshops that are geared toward educating people in neighborhoods of need how to empower themselves,
Right.
and how to reach out to these resources. And it's been wonderful training. And I have the highest esteem for Director Riggs, and it sounds to me like if he and Mayor Ballard want to get neighborhoods, working together to improve themselves, then they need to call up Val Tate and have her and her people come over and do them a seminar.
Well, there again, what we're doing is we're attacking the problem from a public safety perspective.
Right.
So it is necessary that we get those resources available. However, the first thing is to try to reduce crime in those areas that have been targeted, as well as reduce the number of individuals that have been incarcerated going back into the system. The neighborhoods, we do want to empower them, but we also want to make sure that we don't miss our target.
Well, I understand that. I'm a very active IMPD volunteer. So I'm just making the point that if what they're wanting to get at is this holistic approach to building neighborhoods and so forth. The gentleman that came out and discovered, I think I actually read an article about him, or whose name I can't remember, but I'd like to see them get connected with INRC.
What we're going to need to do right now is we're going to have to take a break, so we will pick up any questions that you might have later, and we're going to get the expungement. Right now, I'm getting my cues that we do need to take a break, so with that, I will turn it over to Jim, I guess. Okay, let me ask you this. How many of you have heard of expungement? Okay. It's what's known as the second chance law, and it is only about a year and a half old, not even that, a little bit more than a year old. What expungement is meant to do if somebody has a criminal record, whether it's an arrest record or a conviction record, depending on the type of offense as far as conviction, you can get that record not really expunged. Expunge is sort of a word that came from an old statute. The old expungement law was somebody got arrested and it was the wrong person, you could actually have that record destroyed. You could have every bit of knowledge of it just removed, physically destroyed. That law doesn't exist anymore. Now you have records that are sealed, or if they're not sealed, they're made non-accessible to the public. The whole concept of expungement means that to give somebody a chance who has led a productive, law-abiding life for a certain period of time so it doesn't continue to haunt you. They apply to arrests that didn't lead to convictions. They apply to misdemeanor convictions that are at least 5 years old, or any other acceptable type of conviction that's 8 years or more. And what I mean by that, and I've had people when this came out, I have a 20-year-old, a felony drug dealing. I don't qualify. It's a serious offense. Yeah, you do. Now, you have a child molest. No, you don't. You have something out of the homicide statutes. No, you don't. But you have a B felony burglary. You could qualify. And I'll go ahead and start explaining that. Now, again, the Indiana Code, and this is the only place in the code now that you can get records expunged, which means either sealed or made not available. If you have an arrest, and that arrest does not lead to a conviction, after 1 year after the arrest, you can petition the court to have that record sealed, meaning nobody can get to it except for law enforcement, which includes the prosecutor. But we can't use it without court permission. We can't tell anybody about it. If you do a background search on somebody and you go to the state police, if they have that order, they can't pick it up. And they can't give it to somebody. Now, what that doesn't mean, if somebody got arrested for disorderly conduct, drunk driving, and fleeing from an officer, and you pled to the disorderly conduct, the other 2 counts are dismissed. You cannot get that hidden or expunged. You have to have everything. That arrest could not lead to a conviction at all. The same thing as if you went to trial and you were found guilty of 1 out of 4 counts. Those other 3 counts cannot be expunged because that arrest led to a conviction. You have to wait 1 year unless the prosecutor agrees. The only thing you have to do is have to be a year or less time if we agree since the arrest. You have nothing pending. And everything was dismissed or everything was not guilty. Now, there's one other area that I have never seen. I must tell you, from expungement, this started July 1st, 2013. We have had about 2,700 expungements filed, of which about 1,100 of them were, about 1,000 of them were these types. Arrests that never led to convictions. The others were convictions. That's a lot of stuff. And in fact, where'd Jim disappear to? Jim, you still here? Over there. Yeah. Jim really did an incredible job in helping our office put together policies and protocols in order to get these things quickly. Our office, and I just see that Mr. Curry has walked in, he believes in that second chance. He believes that if somebody has done something that deserves to have that second chance, yeah, we will support this law. Now, convictions. If you have convictions, again, it depends, and I'll get into that, what you can't do. But you only get to do this once in a lifetime. So if you've been convicted 4 times, and you met all the other requirements, and they've all been in Marion County, you got to file it in one petition in Marion County. If you had one of those in Johnson County and 1 in Hamilton County and 3 in Marion County, the Marion County all have to be filed in one petition, and within a 1 year period of time, you got to get those other two filed in those other two counties. If you don't put it in there, you do have the right to try to come back and amend, and a judge can find it's within the best interest of justice. But if you get it and you get expungement, and 2 years later you commit another crime, you're stuck with that for the rest of your life. You don't get that expunged, so you get to use this only once. If you had a misdemeanor, it's if you can show it's been 5 years since the date of the conviction, you haven't had any new convictions in that 5 year period of time, you don't have any cases pending, and you've paid all your fines, costs, fees, and restitution, then the court has to grant you the expungement. Our office isn't going to challenge those for best interest of justice because we can't. We can only say if someone's made an error, if they didn't pay all the fines, costs, and fees. I haven't kept really good records of this, but for people having to pay up on fines, costs, fees, restitution, we're probably $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 that we've helped collect on behalf of the county. We are the only collection attorneys I know that don't get a cut of this. So if you got to pay those fees to get your expungement, my office isn't getting part of that. I did bring that up to both Senate and House committees when they amended the law in March, and I got met with a very nice round of laughter. So prosecutors still aren't going to get a cut of that. Now, most major felonies are eligible for consideration, but certain ones are not under any circumstances. Sex or violent offenders, as defined by statute. People convicted of homicide, which is also manslaughter, anything that leads to a death. Human and sexual trafficking offenses. Official misconduct, and any type of sex crime, as I said, sex or violent crimes, which is defined as a sex or violent offender. You cannot, under any circumstance, get that expunged. That stays with you for the rest of your life. We can't waive it. There's no exceptions. That will stay on your record.
Would you go back to that again, please?
Sure.
What's official misconduct?
Official misconduct means if you are an elected official or running for office, now that does have an exception, and we have to give permission for that. In fact, I'll get to that. I'll go to that section 5 right now. Anything else you can file, and then we can say we don't have a statutory basis to object. We can object. We say it's not the best interest of justice. However, if you've committed a crime where the crime is defined as serious bodily injury, you can't even file that unless our office gives permission, or any prosecutor's office. And the legislature has determined if you were an elected official or running for public office and you commit the crime, that crime can't be expunged without the permission of the prosecutor. So apparently it is the legislature's mind an equally dastardly thing to be a politician or be an elected official and commit a crime, or if you commit a crime with serious bodily injury. So that takes permission of the prosecutor before you can do that. And I'll explain how we go through that procedure. Everybody good on this?
Thank you.
Okay. They changed our criminal code. They amended it. So we used to have a system of A, B, C, and D felonies, D being the less, A being the most serious, and murder actually being the most serious. They have now changed it to a level system. So what were D felonies are now level 6 felonies. If all the statutory requirements are met, then the court has to grant your expungement. And like with the misdemeanors, it's sealed, and I'll explain that in just a moment. However, the difference is instead of 5 years, 8 years has to pass. You can't have any new convictions within that 8-year period of time. You can't have any pending cases. You have to pay all your costs, fines, fees, and restitution. What happens with the misdemeanors and the D felonies are now level 6 felonies, they are put away. They are sealed. You cannot get access to them. If somebody comes in the court and says, I'd like to see the file on State versus Smith, the court can't give you that. If the order gets to the appropriate places, the state police, the sheriff, the IMPD, the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, they say, what's the criminal background on John Doe? They say, we don't have anything. They can't give it. It is sealed. You can't do anything. And again, unless you've met all the statutory requirements, then the court has to grant that expungement. Now, all other allowable felonies, which are then C felonies or above, now level 5s and above, if they are permitted, and as I said, I gave you that list which is not permitted. This is not discretionary, or it rather is discretionary with the court. 8 years have to pass after the date of the sentence, or 3 years after you've completed your sentence, which for the most part means what was happening before they amended the law. Somebody would do 20 years in prison, and then they had to wait 8 more years before they could get expungement. They decided no, they'd give them 3 years to make sure that they were good after they got out of prison. Again, you can't have any new convictions for 8 years after your conviction. Cannot have any pending cases. All fines, fees have to be paid. The difference with this is it's marked expunged, but it still stays in the court records. So I assume somebody could go say, I want to see the John Doe file, and you can see it, but it'll say, this has been expunged. You can't use this information. Maybe it's kind of like saying, don't think about pink elephants. But again, as folks in Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic say, the sweet spot on this is the D felonies, level 6s, and the misdemeanors, because you can't get that access at all. We as prosecutors have the right to access this information. We as prosecutors have the right to ask the court to unseal it if we were to need it for an enhancement, an habitual, something like that. These cases never disappear. They stay, and they can be used against the person if they commit another crime. And if we use that, we can ask it to be unsealed. But for the most part, if it gets sealed and you don't do anything, people aren't going to be able to access it. The last one is the level 5, where it's either serious bodily injuries or felonies committed by elected officials. The first thing is that we have to give approval. Now, we've had a few of those. I have an expungement committee that I oversee. We are still in the process of reviewing those. I think we have 3. What we will do is we will make a recommendation to our boss, and we will give that report, and we will make a recommendation. We think it's a good idea or a bad idea, but the decision lies with the elected prosecutor. He has not seen any of those yet because the committee has not fully vetted all of these. Obviously, if there is a victim, we're going to contact that victim. We're going to see what they say about it. I won't prejudge. It's 5 deputy prosecutors, and I chair that group, and they will look and they will make that recommendation. Okay, how do I get this off? Just hit hide, or let me see. AJ, whatever you can do. Now, the difference is it has to be 10 years from the date of conviction, or 5 years unless there's written consent that you completion of the sentence. Same thing, if you've done time in prison, then you've got to wait 5 years after you get out. And you can't have any pending cases. You have to pay fines, fees, and restitution. Now, somebody might say, yeah, but it's been 6 years on this C burglary. Would you let us go early? We have the right to do that. And again, the same group of prosecutors will review that and determine or not whether we'll let you go early. The committee has the authority to make that decision on early, except in Section 5. That's the elected prosecutor's decision. That is not our decision. Pardon me? Yeah.
Okay, so you say that the record's sealed. Will it show that there is a record, but it's sealed? Or will it just not show up?
If it's a Section 4, which is C felonies and above, it'll show that there's a record. It won't show what's in it. If it is a misdemeanor or a D felony, it won't even show.
Okay.
It'll be gone. Yes, ma'am.
So I noticed you have this thing on Ban the Box, but there are companies that are saying, have you ever had a record expunged?
Yeah, that's the part about how this law works. And if I can get back to the computer, if not, I will do it the old-fashioned way and use that. Good? Okay, good. Let me give you the practical experience, and I'll get to your question in just a second as we get to that. The keeper of records cannot provide any information on expunged cases except to law enforcement or in order to by the court. The records are not destroyed, and it kind of worked AJ and it didn't. But we can retrieve them. There are some exceptions. When the law was amended, the Indiana Supreme Court and the State Court of Bar Examiners, you got to tell them even if it's been expunged. So any of you going to take the Indiana bar, even if it's expunged, you got to tell them. Deals, complying with the secure and fair enforcement. And okay. Which is something most people don't even run into. Close? No. No. All right. Also, if you have a conviction for domestic violence and you get your record expunged, you don't get your gun back. There's another statute that requires that. And that was even without expungement. That's a whole different set of circumstances the victim has to know. That was one of the problems I thought was with the original law. Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. You do or do not get it?
You do not automatically get it back. Because what the expungement law says is as though you've never been convicted. So you can get your licensing, your medical licensing, or apply applications, things like that. Yes, sir.
Well, I was just wondering if a third party happened to access all the criminal records before the expungement law, are there any protections so that they can't use
There
that
are
data?
some, and I will get to that in just a moment, and I guess I got to do this the old-fashioned way. Okay. It is unlawful to discriminate because a person's record has been expunged. So you cannot, but there's been a record that's been expunged or sealed. You cannot suspend, expel, refuse to employ, refuse to admit, refuse to grant or renew a license, permit or certificate necessary to engage in any activity, occupation, or profession, or otherwise discriminate against. Again, those are nice words, but here are the rights. Kind of get to your point. If you can prove somebody used that against you, then you do have some legal rights to go back against this person, because if you get expungement, all your civil rights are returned to you, including the right to vote, which you would get anyway, hold public office, serve as a juror. Any application for employment, license, right, or privilege a person may be questioned about previous criminal record only in terms that exclude expunged convictions. So in the state of Indiana, and you should keep this if you own a business and you're putting out an application, or if you have an application, all you can ask in Indiana is, have you ever been arrested or convicted of a crime that has not been expunged by a court? You cannot ask, have you ever been arrested or convicted? That does not apply if you go into the state of Ohio, even if you've had an expunged record. But if Ohio tries to seek that record out in Indiana, they won't get it. It does not apply for federal applications. Federal law supersedes Indiana law. But for the state of Indiana, and again, that's what this is meant to do. This is meant to permit people who have old convictions to get on with their lives, at least in the state of Indiana. And the law is very clear. A person whose record is expunged shall be treated as if the person had never been convicted of that offense. If you discriminate against that person where they've had an expunged record and you can prove it, again, our office doesn't really get involved in too much of this, but I've known the law pretty well now. It's a Class C infraction, and that person can be held in contempt of court, the court that ordered the expungement. A person may file, who's been discriminated against, a written motion of contempt to bring alleged violations to the attention of the court, and could get injunctive relief to keep them from being able to do that. And I think we have this distributed. Well, we have this on our website. If you go to our website, prosecutor's website, and you go to the FAQs and the talk expungement, it will have a list. There's attorney referral from the Bar Association, the Indiana Legal Services, Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic. There are other groups, but I can only put on the ones that will give us permission to go ahead and use that. There's a couple of questions, ma'am.
So potential employer, is it legal for them to ask that question?
Only if they ask the question that has not been expunged. It is not legal for them to say they're convicted, arrested or convicted of a crime.
So,
see that, you need to get legal assistance with that. You need to let, there's really not much our office can do about it because it's not, it's an infraction, it's not a felony or a misdemeanor. But I would say that the one real good group is Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic. But you cannot ask that. If you see that, you have to let them know they're breaking the law in the state of Indiana. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
What about, and I apologize, I'm a little ignorant on some of the finer points here, but if it was a mental health diversion that somebody had gotten, is there any way?
If it's a diversion, what happens is when you go through a diversion program and you successfully completed, the case is dismissed. The case is dismissed, the law is clear. Dismissal is a dismissal. You're under Section 1. So it's been a year since the arrest. Court has to get it. It's been a year for the arrest. Everything was dismissed. You got nothing pending. It's not even a conviction. It is considered a dismissal under Section 1.
Okay. So if it shows up on a background search?
Well, if it does, let me explain what's happening, what I'm finding out from people telling me, attorneys that have talked to me about what they've seen. If you have a group that's already gotten your information, right now the law doesn't say anything about them having to get rid of that information. If they already have it, they can use it, but if an employer uses that, they could have consequences. I believe that the sponsors of the legislation are going to try to put something in there just saying that even, you know, if you have old information, you need to check and you cannot provide that to an employer. I don't know how they're going to work it. The other thing is the internet. If anything came up about you, that arrest, that situation, it's going to be there forever, and this law doesn't cover that. It's the official records. If they go to the state, and usually what they do is they go to the state police, and they go to the sheriff, they go to the DMV. That's how they usually do your background checks. And if they have that order, and that order says you can't let it out, they don't. That has taken some time too. There have been people who do these what we call pro se. They do them by themselves. They don't pick up the orders and they don't send them anywhere. State police doesn't have the order. State police isn't going to block anything just because the court ordered it. They don't know about it. So that's one of the questions that they have to be able to take care of to do that. Some of you may have seen those billboards. I mean, there's a lot of people out there. For convictions alone, I think we're up to about 900 of them. And it's something we have to look through triage. We're required to notify the victims. If it is a misdemeanor or a D felony level 6, if you don't like the idea of a person getting expungement, the court cannot consider that. It is mandatory, they have to grant it. If you don't like it and it's a C felony level 5 or above, you can't. Usually, and we try very hard to find everybody, but some of these, especially these ones now, are getting to be kind of old. They're 8 years old, they're 5 years old. I've had people call me going, I don't even remember this, or it's okay. On the few times where, even if it's mandatory, if they don't like it, I put that in my answer, that we do understand, you know, that the person's been advised, doesn't like it, understands it's mandatory. I think I've only had one hearing where somebody wanted to tell the court they didn't think it was a good idea. Let me ask you this. How old do you think my oldest conviction for expungement has been? Give me a year. Somebody yell, put a year out.
14.
1914? No, 19 what? Guess what year? 1987.
64.
62. 62 is the oldest one. And I don't think the guy would needed to find a job. I think he just wanted it off his record. And that was fine. But I've had him from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. Some of those records don't exist anymore. So you got to kind of get your best shot as to what it is. A lot of those victims don't exist anymore. But people have been taking advantage of. Some people just want to have that clean record. Other people want to use it to help out their, help their ability to get a second chance to be able to kill. And again, it's not as though it disappears. We can still use it if somebody does something wrong. Really vicious crimes can't be expunged. And again, understand if it was a major felony or a felony at all, they have to be crime-free for 8 years before they can get this, unless we were to waive that time frame. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I understand that if your record is
or whatnot, it's just fun, but does it come off of DOC?
Yes, DOC also uses that. So you can't pick it up out of DOC. Thank you for reminding me about that. Yeah.
This is from
Oh,
other-
AJ fixed it, okay. This is the services that we have on our website. There are other groups that do that. There are people that advertise that they do that. Some of them are very, very good. Some attorneys, I don't know how they got through law school, much less got a law license because they can't read a statute. But go ahead, sir.
Well, what I was going to ask is there any effective programs that the state has that instructs
Yes.
prisoners with life socialization and life skills while they're in prison?
Okay, that's getting a little bit off, but yeah, it depends. I used to work for the Department of Correction, and they do have some vocational things. The education, higher education, they no longer do. And yeah, the idea, believe it or not, our Constitution says that the penal system is there not to punish, but to help people rehabilitate. And I think those of you that have been around long enough, I know my friend Al has seen this, some people you can't rehabilitate because they haven't been habilitated first. But those people usually die in prison. But yeah, DOC has some programs. But understand, it's not just people that have gone to prison. That's a small percentage of people that have criminal convictions. Most people with criminal convictions haven't been in prison. They may have spent some time in jail, or if they were in prison, it's a small period of time. But they still have that hanging over their heads because an employer isn't going to wonder if you did hard time. They just want to know if you had a conviction. Ma'am.
Earlier, when you talked about community barriers and community acceptance, I have a question. Who is responsible when they put group homes in residential neighborhoods and they don't tell? I think the problem comes when the people that live in those neighborhoods are not told that this is what's going to happen, and then they don't have any idea what kind of convictions that the people that they're putting in residential neighborhoods have.
Now, are you talking
Group homes.
So you're talking mental health group homes?
No.
Okay, what are you talking? You're talking about that?
Halfway houses.
Okay, well, the halfway house is here. I mean, there is the Duval Center, and that's kind of isolated, but the community very much knew about that one. There is, well, see, VOA doesn't do it anymore, but there's another one that's on Washington Street.
No, this
Liberty
was
Hall.
one
Which one are you talking about?
Arlington, and when the street was Winston, because they talked about it in, I don't know, every monthly.
That's just so much transitional housing.
That could be some transitional housing, but that's not necessarily, that isn't run by the Department of Correction, that's not run by probation.
And probably,
Well, what you're going to have, I think I know what you're talking about. These are private individuals that try to put people together to give them short-term alternative housing. They are not run or sanctioned by the Department of Correction. They're not run or sanctioned by probation. They're not run or sanctioned by parole or by community corrections. These usually tend to be individuals who try to find short-term intermediate housing for these individuals. Because when you get out of prison, you got to have a place to live. But they're not paid for, they're not sanctioned by the criminal justice system. These are people, entrepreneurs that are putting them together. And part of that's going to be your zoning. Part of that's going to be, what they can put in there and what they can't. But it's not part of the criminal justice system. Does that help clarify?
Yes,
Okay. Ma'am.
I want to go back to the barriers because I deal with a population that I'm trying to help get back into society sometimes through my church. They go through the training, they go through the education levels, and then when they go to get hired through the program, they don't get hired. And they get sent back through these training programs. So who assesses the quality of these programs that are out here? Because you have Goodwill Industries listed, and I personally called Goodwill to see if they still have training. I was told they didn't do that.
And that's sort of the problem, to try to keep what's up to date and what you got and what you don't have. In fact, Bob, I may have you come on up in a moment and kind of address some of that. Again, it's probation, parole, community corrections, and what we call reentry court. Those are things that are run by the criminal justice system, DOC, by the court system, by the community correction board. And those are groups that have certain standards of what they have to look for. But again, it can get frustrating. A group that might have a training program today 6 months from now may not be there. One of the problems I know Don has is how do you keep this stuff current? I know that Chris still here. Did he take off? Okay, when Chris was here, I mean, that's one of the things that the Mayor's Reentry folks have to do. How do you keep it current? How do you keep it active? Because there's nothing more frustrating than sending somebody to a place where it doesn't exist. The other problem is it's got to be certified. Probation, community corrections, parole have certain guidelines. They'll go by the probation guidelines sent by the Judicial Center in the Indiana Supreme Court. So if you're going to be a drug treatment center, you've got to be certified. You can't just say, I'm going to help you with your drug addiction. They have to have certification in order to get credit for what you're doing, whether that means for getting off parole, getting off probation, etc. We know that's a problem. That is something we continue to work with. And we need folks like you to keep being part of the team so that we can try to keep these current. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
As far as talking about all the restitution and the fees and everything, how does that work? I mean, do they get given a period of time to pay that back? I mean,
Well, we don't put people in jail for not paying fees. We're not supposed to anyway. We don't have debtors' prisons. But if you don't pay it, it sticks with you. So it'll go onto your credit reports. If you want expungement, you've got to have that paid. The legislature got rid of a lot of requirements. I won't get into all of them, but now basically you have to be crime-free for 5 or 8 or 10 years. You can't have anything pending, but you have to pay your fines, costs, fees, and restitution.
well, I guess I'm not speaking specifically of expungement, but just someone in general.
Well, someone in general, they will order that, and then usually once they want to get you off probation, they'll reduce it to a judgment, the court will, and so you'll have a judgment against you. And that judgment, again, I'm not a bankruptcy attorney, but I believe that's not supposed to be dischargeable in bankruptcy if it's court-ordered judgment. But that stays with you like everything else. Most people that haven't paid it, they haven't paid a lot of things. Now, what will happen in some situations, the courts will say you're indigent as to fines, costs, fees, not for restitution, because that's money that's owed to you. That's not owed to the court. But they give them a period of time. If you don't pay it, you could have your probation extended. But usually what ends up, there's a judgment against you. Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just had a question. Well, Mr. Osley, when you were talking about the gentleman that had the job for a number of years, I want to know if with the new Indiana law, say that a person gets the job like this individual had, do they have any legal standing if they're let go after they got the job, they did well on the job, and they were fired because of the record that the employer saw later?
Well, if I could just handle that a minute. If the record had been expunged, yes. If the record has not been expunged, again, it depends on the employment situation. Again, I'm not an employment attorney, but I think we're kind of an at-will state, so that, in fact, actually, boss, isn't that true? Aren't we in an at-will that the employer can follow? I mean, you would have remedies civil if you thought you were being discriminated against, but for the most part, they can let you go. But that's civil. That isn't criminal.
I was just curious if that was with the Indian law saying now with the ban the box, if that would carry over since they have the ban the box.
Well, eventually they may find out. But if they do find out, they've already said, hey, there's something about you really want. There's something about you we really like. And if they find out, hopefully it says, well, okay, you got the criminal, but you really sold us. We want to keep you. If the ban the box is on that application, that first interview. But by the second interview, you got them hooked, and they can ask you that stuff. Ma'am, you had a question?
Yes, I just wonder if expungement.
I'm sorry, ma'am, could you speak up just a little?
Is expungement necessary for juvenile convictions?
The law does put it in there, but there's other things that go with juvenile, things that get sealed. But you can get expungement. I have never seen one. I have not seen under this statute, 3538.9, I haven't seen a juvenile one, although it does talk about juvenile adjudications. It can be done, but I've not seen one. Is anybody? Yes, sir.
Do they ask on employment applications if you got a juvenile record?
Some may, some, I don't know. I've never seen one, but they may.
Yes, even if it's sealed. So.
I've never seen one, but I would imagine they could.
I don't know. Maybe
Okay, I think we got time. One more, anybody else? Okay, well, thank you very, very much. Sorry we had a bit of a glitch, and I think the stuff that we wanted to get you as far as resources, I believe that was printed out and you should have that.
I think the dialogue is great. It's good to have the dialogue and the questions. That's part of our learning process. Would you join me in thanking both of our speakers, counselors? Where has the time gone? Am I the only one that this seems like this was, for those that have been with us a couple years, this was the quickest academy? This one has gone by so fast. Just want to thank all of you for joining us this year and giving us an opportunity to teach, giving us an opportunity to give you information that you can share with your communities, as I mentioned earlier. Special thanks to WCTY for being here every single Monday night. They will make available to us the video, and it will go on our MCPO website, so you will be able to get that. Before we move into our presentation, Prosecutor Curry is here, and Terry, I'll tell you that someone was already asking about the Laurel. You want?
I was just going to ask you about the stain last night.
The game, the Steelers, was it the?
We were dressed like honeybees, so we kind of stole the color.
Well, anyway, so let's. We're gonna move.
CJ will have an application.
There were fans not well.
Terry, did you have any final remarks?
No, just briefly. First of all, again, let's thank Andy and particularly Councilor Osley for coming out and helping out. Quite a bit of work for our staff, and obviously, I don't know if they're all introduced today. Would you introduce the staff here today?
No, we can do that. Let's do it.
Yeah, please. All you have to put it together.
So Whaler. Pam Rinker.
And Trent Taylor.
Michael Loveland. AJ Deere. Kevin, you're not our staff. It's Mr. Andy Kern.
That's my husband. He comes in and sets up and.
And he's a lieutenant on the police department as well. Mantur. So it's a lot of work by them, but in particular it's always nice when those who came last year, we had Mike Medler from the crime lab came out and participated, to have Council Osley take his time to prepare and be here tonight. That is much appreciated. And just like a couple observations about the whole idea of expungement and reentry. Who's here from Recycle Force? Someone here from Recycle Force?
I'm not from Recycle Force, but unofficially, I did my dissertation research there.
Okay.
On looking at mental health. So
I wasn't able to the first part. Recycle Force is one of the better known reentry programs here in the city. And from our office standpoint, we are all on board with the idea that individuals come out, women and men come out of the Department of Correction, or just come out of the criminal justice system. We are 100% on board with the idea that we don't want to put up artificial barriers to those individuals coming back and successfully re-entering the community. And so with Recycle Force, for example, we partner with Recycle Force, our office says, to address returning offenders' child support obligation. Make sure that if they come out with some huge child support obligation, that's not going to be another obstacle to their successful return. And so, we've got a long way to go, but I think we're making progress. And, the mayor's task force obviously sort of pushed down, go forward. And on expungement, we were literally maybe one of only one or two prosecutors' offices in the entire state that was on board with the idea of expungement. A lot of, I don't want to cast aspersion on my fellow prosecutors, but some of them in the rural counties, it's like the hell with them. They got a record, but from our standpoint, if individuals have in fact demonstrated that they want to be productive members, then let's eliminate the barriers to their reentry. So again, thanks for participating this year. Knowledge is power, and we love your input in terms of subjects for next year as well. With that, what do we got? We got T-shirts, we got certificates.
Yes, for those people
door prizes.
Yeah, we did the door prizes, the folks that stuck with us, but also, Terry